This happened when I moved into my first place. I was still at university at the time, but because I didn't really like the dorms my university offered, I looked for a private rental, and I found a great one. Shortly after I moved in, I began to suffer with sleep paralysis. That was really scary for me because I never had it before. Another weird thing was going on at the same time. I had an abundance of calls, and they were all wrong number calls. I got so frustrated with these calls, I pretty much set my phone to answer machine only. I would hear this weird old lady leaving me these strange, rambling messages that didn't make any sense. There was also one message that really creeped me out. It was left by a man, and all he said was, "Your father's dead." It wasn't true, by the way. My father was fine. One day I was just lying on my bed after classes, and my bed faces the balcony. I was naturally looking in that direction, and that was when I saw a shadowy figure move past the gap in the curtains. I shouted out some expletives. Then this guy came into my apartment through the balcony doors. It was terrifying. I instantly regretted yelling at him. I thought that he was alone, but I was shocked to see about 6 other people enter my apartment behind him. They slowly walked in and surrounded me and my bed. I was so shocked and scared that I couldn't move a muscle. The only thing I could do was mumble, I'm sorry," over and over again. After a minute or two, they all left through the way they came in. I regained the use of my limbs, and after a few nervy moments, I summoned the courage to go and inspect the balcony. My apartment was on the 5th floor, but there was a fire escape hatch through the floor out there. The hatch to the fire escape hadn't been opened. I could tell because there was rainwater on it. If it had been opened, surely the rainwater wouldn't have pooled there. Come to think of it, I should have seen wet footprints in my room, but I didn't. These conclusions led me to believe that I must have had a bad dream. If that's the case, then it was the most realistic dream I ever had. After that, things kind of calmed down for a while. I began to get more comfortable with the place. I even invited some of my friends from university over for a party. We were drinking and having a great time. That was until one of my friends started shouting. I heard him shout, "Hey, you, what are you doing?" I turned his way, and he was looking out towards the balcony. He said that he just saw some shadowy figures pass by on the balcony. I was instantly reminded of my dream, and thought that maybe it wasn't a dream. I had to get out of that apartment, so I searched for a new one. I couldn't find one, and I ended up in a dorm. But at least there wasn't any shadowy figures there. This happened recently, and I think about it constantly. I just bought a new TV, and I was setting it up quite late one night, after work. I had to search for all the channels, etc. It had an automatic setting, but some of the channels were a little bit different from my last setup. So I was messing around with the channels to make the new TV like my old TV. After the automatic thing did its thing, it landed on this weird channel. There was no picture, just black. There was audio though. All I could hear was the chirp of insects. You know, like grasshoppers or cicadas. I sat there with a beer, drinking and watching for a while. It was just darkness for a while, and then, just as I was about to change the channel, I think I saw a flash of white go across the screen, and shortly after that, I heard a blood-curdling scream. It was undoubtedly that of a female. I shut the TV off immediately. It creeped me out. I tried to convince myself that maybe I was a little tipsier than I realized, and maybe I'd caught a scene from a horror film or something, but I knew deep down that I saw something a little weird that night. I lay in bed thinking about it for a while, and then I fell asleep. I woke up in the morning, still curious about what I witnessed last night. I turned on the TV, and made sure that I was on the channel that I was on the night before. I wanted to know what that screen was. On the screen, I saw a white building which appeared to be in the middle of a forest. It looked like I was watching this building through a security camera. I didn't know how the hell I had a live feed of some security camera on my TV. I know that this was the channel I heard the screams on last night. I looked at the building for a while. There were no external lights on the white building, which is why I probably didn't see it last night on the TV. The scream really bothers me. I wonder if I'm connected to a channel that I'm not supposed to be. I still have access to that channel, but I don't watch it. Hi guys, me here, Jay. This story really stands out to me because I've had an experience a little bit like this. I was babysitting my sister when I was 15, and I had a friend round, and we were trying to set something up, like to get my new DVD player on the TV downstairs. I brought it from upstairs downstairs like that, and we landed on this weird channel that I haven't seen before or since. It was like a security camera, and basically there was a head. It was all like really like sandstormy, you know, that white noise kind of thing on TV. And there was a head just in front of this window which had crisscrosses in it, like the way the window was, it had these like diamond pattern crosses, and that was like our kitchen window. So I was like, me and my friend were panicking like crazy, thinking like somebody's holding a camera looking into our house and somehow it's on our TV. Really weird. So we ran around trying to find out what was going on. I don't know what it was. Maybe it was just some weird channel that looked like someone was outside filming in the house. You know, hell of a coincidence though, really creepy. And on another occasion, there's something really weird about my house. Underneath the house we think is like a World War II basement or something. There's cables that go into underground. So our house is on like a kind of hill. And like one day my brother cut the cables and pulled it all out. And we haven't been able to get down there because we don't know where the entrance point is. But one day I'd love to go down there and see if there's anything there. And if there's a camera down there, I'm going to absolutely die. Anyway, I just thought I'd share that little one with you quickly. Back to scary stories. This happened when I went to visit my grandparents after not seeing them for a long time. It was a really nostalgic trip. I hadn't been back for years. When I was young, I used to play in a park not too far from a shrine. So I took my nephew there to play one morning. When I arrived, it seemed a lot smaller than I remembered. I guess that's what happens when you grow up, huh? It was amazing to see all my favorite things in the park. The swings, the roundabout, the seesaw. I couldn't help but smile. The sandbox had been there since I was in elementary school. I couldn't believe it was still there. There were 5 kids in there, working together and building sandcastles. It was summer vacation after all. My nephew ran to join them without hesitation. Ha, what it is to be young. It's over before you know it, right? I watched him race over to the slide down it, then repeat the process a couple more times. Something felt a little bit off though. I didn't know what it was, but I guessed that it was because I hadn't been back there for a while. "I want to do this one next," my nephew shouted as he led me by the hand to the swings. I smiled at him, and I was happy to see him excited, but I still had this strange feeling of unease. I pushed him on the swing. I listened to him laugh, and I was staring off into the distance, not particularly focusing on anything in particular. I remember the way the slide's metallic surface was glinting in the summer sun, and the way the kids were playing in the sandbox. Time seemed to be slowing down. I had been idly pushing my nephew on the swing, not listening to what the kids were saying, shouting or screaming about in the sandbox. I heard their voices without listening to them. Then something clicked and I found the source of my unease. I looked and listened to what the kids were doing in the sandbox. I could hear their voices now. I hadn't been paying attention to anything they had been saying since I got there. I saw them all in a small circle, crouching. They were peering down at something. Their backs were facing me. For all I know, they could have been like that from the moment my nephew and I entered the park. I shielded the sun from my eyes with my hand and watched them for a moment. They looked as if they had dug the sand up and were piling it in one corner of the sand pit. What the hell were they doing? Was this some new game? I wondered. Interesting, I thought. Luckily, my nephew was heading over towards the sandbox, so I followed and decided to strike up a conversation with the kids. "Hey guys," I called as we approached. The boy closest to us replied, and then the others said hello. "What are you guys doing? Seeing how deep this thing is?" I thought that they were playing with a stick or something, maybe using it to dig or displace the heavier sand, but when I drew closer, I realized what they were holding was white. What was it? Some kind of thick stick of chalk or something? I asked the kid who was holding it what it was. "Oh, this? It's a bone," he replied. I was shocked by how straight-edged his response was. Is that a bone? Are kids playing with bones now? I couldn't get my head around it. I took a closer look at the bone the kid was holding. This wasn't some chicken bone. It was long and thick, and it was burned in parts too. It was scorched of all its former flesh. Where did this bone come from? I heard myself ask. I knew I shouldn't have done this since I was the adult and they were children. It wasn't my place. I regret asking them, but their answer shocked me to my core. "Oh, it came from a person. There are loads of these bones in the sandbox. Do you want to take one home with you?" A kid replied. I didn't know what to do, so I just refused and grabbed my nephew by his hand and led him away from these creepy kids. He obviously couldn't understand at his young age what had happened and why we were leaving. He started crying because he wanted to keep on playing. It's a weird story. I reported it to the police, but they never got back to me. Maybe they thought I was crazy. I used to play in that sandbox all the time as a kid. I really hate to think that there might have been bones in it back then. But the bones I saw those children holding didn't look that old though. This happened when I was really young, about 20 years ago. This experience is still talked about in my family, and it has its own name. The Snow Day Mystery. On the day in question, as evening approached, it began to snow. It didn't stop until it was late, and it was dark out. The news person told us that we could expect about 10 centimeters. Wow. That morning, there were 3 of us in the family at home. Me, my sister, and my grandma. My dad and grandfather came back from work at around 4 p.m. A little later, my mum came home. I think it could have been no later than about 6 p.m. She was out grocery shopping. When Mum came home, I remember that the snow wasn't that thick. I think it was only about a centimeter thick. The important thing to remember here is that there has been no one coming and going in or out of our family home. At around midnight, my grandma said before she went to bed, "I wonder how much has piled up." I was interested too. I walked over to the back door. It was in the kitchen. I opened it and I noticed something strange. "There are footprints in the snow," I said. I looked out there and there were footprints leading up to our kitchen door from the vacant lot behind our house. They looked as if they went on and on. I wanted to see where they came from, but it was too dark and I couldn't. One thing for certain was the fact that these footprints led right up to our back door. This sparked a reaction in the house. My grandparents went into full panic mode. They went into search mode. They looked everywhere around the house. They went to the garage, the garden. They even looked inside the house. I mean, I get it, the footprints stopped right in front of our door. There was cause for concern. There were no signs of a break-in, inside or outside of the house. The footprints just seemed to terminate the back door, and thus the Snow Day Mystery was born. No matter what angle you looked at the situation from, the footprints stopped at the door, and the owner of those footprints was still unaccounted for. We could only assume that whoever walked up to our back door must have gotten in the house. However, since the kitchen door is so close to the living room, the room we were spending most of the morning and afternoon in, we surely would have noticed someone walking in. Also, there were no wet footprints in the house. On the other hand, The footprints stopped at the door. They didn't turn and go a different direction. They just stopped there as if someone had entered, or as if someone had stood there, watching. We should have seen more steps in the garden if someone walked up to the door and then walked away. We theorized that the owner of those footsteps must have walked up to the back door, realized that there were people in there, and then walked backwards in their own footprints away. But why would someone do that? The footprints were still there. What would have been the point? Just so we, on the off chance, would see some footprints in our garden? They were counting on us looking out there before the end of the night? Before the snow thawed? It just doesn't make sense. What was the purpose? Intimidation? You can tell I've thought about this a lot. The next morning, my mum got up early and went outside. She tried to follow the footprints. She got as far as the road, but then the footprints were lost under tire tracks. It seemed impossible to trace them. I spent many sleepless nights as a kid thinking about the possibility that they got inside, and they were able to get in and out whenever they wanted. I also tortured myself with the idea of killers and the paranormal. We still talk about it whenever snow crops up in conversation. As I've gotten older, I have subscribed to the opinion that it wasn't the paranormal. I believe that there was a very real person in our garden that night, and for whatever reason they didn't harm or bother us, but I think it was close. I wonder if the back door wasn't locked, what might have happened. It would have been my grandma and me and my sister against whatever was out there. I don't know if I like those odds. Whoever was out there knew how to sneak, and I think we got really lucky that day. This happened when I was in elementary school. I think that I was in year 6, roughly 11 years old. My parents were called away urgently, because one of my aunties or uncles were in need of some urgent childcare. They didn't go into the full details of why they had to go away, but I knew it was something serious. I remember it was a Saturday, and my parents planned to leave at dusk. I was asked to keep an eye on my cousins, since I was the eldest. I had a choice to go with my parents, and I wish I did, but it seemed way more fun to stay at home with my cousins. The cousins in question were a 7-year-old boy and a 5-year-old girl. They were siblings. They kept nagging me to go and play with them. I couldn't take it anymore, and I buckled to the persistent requests from my little cousins. The younger sibling demanded a game of hide-and-seek. I didn't mind that. I wasn't too cool for a game of hide-and-seek. I thought that if I let them go and hide, I would have a couple of seconds peace while I counted down before I had to go and find them. I counted down from 50 and then I went to find them. My male cousin, the older sibling, hid in a nearby wardrobe, so he was easy to find. His sister, however, proved incredibly difficult to find. I couldn't really be bothered to search every place in the house, so I thought if I called out to her, I would be able to find her. I walked around the house, asking aloud, "Are you ready?" And because she was little and didn't really understand the premise of the game, she would enthusiastically answer, "Yes, I am." It sounded like she was hiding under the bed. I bent down as silently as I could and looked under the bed, but there was no one there. Strange. I called out again, "Are you ready?" And then I heard suppressed laughter coming from a wardrobe, a different one to the one I had found my cousin in. I threw open the door with a smile, and then frowned when I found it empty. At this point, her brother joined the hunt. She was a good hider, I'll give her that. We couldn't find her. After a few more minutes of searching, I started to feel uneasy. I got a little scared for her, so I called out to her one more time. "I surrender, you win, you're the champion, can you come out now?" I heard the bathroom door creak, and then I saw her smiling, victorious face. I just looked in the bathroom. It was pretty strange. I asked her outright, where was she hiding, after she stopped celebrating her victory over me. She replied, "That's the secret." We decided to play a board game after that. All the while, I couldn't get my mind off of what had just happened. It was stuck in my head, like, where the hell was she hiding? Later that night, my cousin's father came to pick up his children. Since the hour had grown late, I decided to take myself to bed. Looking back on it, why didn't I just go to their house? I'll still never understand that. While in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about that game of hide and seek. I think I must have dozed off. I heard a voice. You know, that dreamlike state right before you plunge into a deep sleep. You're hovering on the edge of consciousness. I was in that moment, and then I heard something. A voice from within my dark bedroom. Are you ready? I jolted awake, like that feeling you have when you're in that dreamlike state, where you feel yourself falling, and then you're suddenly awake. I heard it again. Are you ready? It was very, very faint, but I heard it. It was there. That voice didn't belong to either of my cousins, and it wasn't a young voice. I covered myself from head to toe in my duvet and blankets. That voice sounded old. It sounded adult and female. I heard it again. It sounded like it was getting closer. My body started involuntarily shaking. Panic gripped me. My heart was thumping. Are you ready? I couldn't reply like my cousin did. I couldn't just say, yes I am. I didn't know what that would entail. I didn't know what would happen if I did that. I felt so scared and stressed, and I was still young, so the only logical answer that came to the forefront of my mind was, no, I'm not ready. I heard that old woman voice whisper somewhere close to my bed in a voice as raspy as a mosquito. Are you ready? I felt as if I was about to be found in a game of hide and seek I didn't even enter into. This was the moment. The duvet and blankets were vigorously thrown upwards from my head. I screwed my eyes as tightly shut as I could. I let out the loudest scream I had ever heard. I fearfully opened my eyes after a few seconds and saw nothing but my dark and empty bedroom. I have no idea what the hell that was. I stayed up until my parents got home, absolutely petrified. I want to share a story which happened during my childhood. It happened when I was in kindergarten, and I can remember it still well. My grandparents' house was close to my parents' house, and our family used to spend a lot of our time visiting them. There wasn't a whole lot to do at my grandparents' house, so I would often find myself bored. I liked playing outside at that age, so at every chance I had, when we were visiting them, I would head outside. That day I was so bored. I don't remember what my family were talking about inside, but I know I didn't want to stay in to listen to it. I wanted out. When I opened the front door, it was night. I knew that this simply could not be. Our family had gone over in the morning. How the hell was it night out? I was surprised, yet curious. So I stepped out into the darkness. He had something like a screen door, and it was open. I looked out and everything looked completely different. I don't know how to rationally explain it. It was like I was somewhere completely new. Let me try to describe it. It was like some kind of giant factory. There were coarse, rusted pipes running everywhere. The hum of distant and nearby machines was in the air. I wondered if they were working properly. I don't know why, but I was acutely aware of these machines and their capacity to work correctly. I can't explain it. There were so many mechanical sounds, robotic bleeps, and sterile-sounding humming noises. I started to get scared and worried. I made an instinctive choice to turn back, but when I turned back and laid my hand on my grandfather's door handle, something was different. The door looked ancient. It was covered in rust, dust, and encroaching foliage. It looked like the door hadn't been used in hundreds of years. I tried to use the handle, but it wouldn't turn. Panic set in. I was hurriedly trying the handle over and over again, but it wouldn't budge. Then I started pushing, banging, and kicking the door. It wouldn't budge. It didn't move at all. I sat there and faced the miles and miles of machines and broke down and cried, just as I felt as if I was about to give up. The door behind me opened with a terrifying squeak. My grandma walked through the door and she instantly threw her arms around me. I was in floods of tears. There was something so unexplainably disturbing to me about what had just happened that I could not produce no other reaction than tears. As I sat there, wailing and sniffling, I heard people approaching. I didn't want to turn to face the directions of the machines again, but I heard familiar voices. I saw my mum, dad, grandpa, auntie, uncle, and a few police officers walking up my grandparents' driveway towards me. According to my parents, I went outside just before noon, and I didn't come back home, so they went in search of me. But when it got dark out, and I hadn't responded to any of their calls of my name, they called the police and reported me missing. I was found by my grandma crying and wailing at exactly 1 a.m. I was then asked to explain myself in front of my family and the police. I did what I always thought was right and told the truth. I told them that I went outside and I saw nothing but machinery, and I couldn't get back in. No one believed me. My mum scolded me the worst. I cried this time not out of fear, but out of a sense of injustice, I guess. Whenever our families get together during the holiday period, we always get to talking about the old times, and my mum never hesitates to bring this incident up. To this day, I don't have an explanation. I don't quite know what happened that day. It's still a mystery to me. This happened back in my college days. Graduation day would come in the following semester, and I had a lot of free time, and not so much money. One day I got bored of lazing around, so I went in search of a job, and I managed to get one, working as a handyman. Well, handyman apprentice might be a more accurate description. I was working with these 3 retired handymen, and when it was time for hard physical work, they left it to us hired uni students. The work wasn't constant, but I needed it, and I had the time. The next job was going to be clearing out a house and a pond somewhere deep in the countryside. It was expected to take 2 days to complete the job, and it was a high-paying job too. It didn't seem that difficult, so I jumped at the chance. I should have been skeptical. It was way too much money for the work they had requested, but nonetheless, I signed myself up, and I would be accompanied by one of the retired handymen, as well as a guy who would be kind of overseeing things like a foreman or something. We drove in a company vehicle with a wide back, like a shuttle bus or a big van. It took about 3 hours to get there. This took place at the end of August, by the way, while I was still on vacation from university. When we arrived at the location, I realized that it was in the middle of an abandoned village. Yet there seemed to be a few people living there. I've heard of villages slowly declining in numbers until the place basically becomes depopulated. There are numerous reasons why: aging population, lack of opportunities, etc. I don't want to say where it was because I don't think you'd want to go there by the time I get through with my story. Plus, there might be some other people living there that we didn't meet. The house we were going to be working on was on the crest of a hill. Seemed like this house would be owned by someone wealthy in time gone by, perhaps like a village elder, a wealthy farmer, or someone who had this passed down to them through inheritance. It was old, but amazingly big. It was a 1-story home with 20 rooms, a mansion. The garden was huge, but overran with weeds. We arrived at around 9 a.m, and we instantly got to work on the pond. The pond was long, and it curved around the outside of the house in an interesting pattern. I bet by the time we left it would be looking great, but that morning the water was green and murky. There would surely be nothing living in there in its current state. There's a drainage hole down there, and we got a pump in the van, but if we use it without raking the pond, it's likely to clog, so we can't have that. Rake it thoroughly first. The foreman told me. It made sense because if the pump bust, then we would waste time driving back to go get a new one. He handed me and the old man a couple of nets. We were told to fill some wooden boxes we brought with us in the van with whatever came out of the pond, and then we would take all that trash back with us. The foreman said that other boxes would be brought up to the house later that evening. I figured that whatever we pulled out of the water could rest on the riverbanks drying until the other boxes came. I didn't expect there to be much down there. Maybe some rocks and weeds and stuff like that. The old handyman and I split up and started sweeping the pond with our nets from opposite ends. When my net emerged, I saw pale shards of white bones. I guessed that the bones belonged to the animals that inhabited the nearby mountains. cats, small dogs, weasels, and other identifiable creatures. I'm not an expert, but you could tell by the shape of their skulls that they weren't human. I thought that this would be common for ponds which had been long left dormant, to be honest. I thought I would find bones. I just didn't expect to find as many as we did. There were ancient algae green bones coming up from the murky depths. I had no choice but to keep piling them up on the banks. It was hot that day. I was sweating profusely, and hauling bones out of a weed-filled pond is harder than it sounds, to be honest. I can't tell you how many animals were down there, but I wouldn't be surprised if the number was close to 100. By lunch, we had drained the pond to about the midway point. I could see the bottom when we used the pump to flow the water down the banks. The bottom was a dark shade of brown, and when the water settled, I saw even more bones down there. They were bigger bones now, as well as the small ones that we had been hauling. When we got back to work, after a while, another van arrived with more of those wooden boxes the foreman promised us. By the time the bones were all loaded into those boxes, the sun was beginning to set. It's funny, I swear that some of those bones looked human-like in the dark. The skulls not too much, too small, too misshapen. We knew we would be spending the night there, but I didn't expect to be staying in the mansion. We were given dinner. It was nicer than the lunch. All three of us would be staying in a room on the ground floor next to the pond and the garden. The room hadn't been cleaned, there was dust everywhere. I spent a while wiping a human-sized shape out of the dust so that I would have somewhere to sleep. There were no futons. We were given blankets as thin as towels and nothing more. Thankfully, it wasn't cold that night. In fact, we needed to open the shutters and the sliding door to the garden to get airflow. There were at least metal coils, which, when lit, repelled mosquitoes. Can't stand mosquitoes. We had light, but no TV or radio. I just chatted with the old men, and they shared their whiskey with me. I think I fell asleep around 10 p.m. I was completely exhausted. I'm glad I was exhausted, because getting to sleep on that rotten flooring would have been impossible otherwise. I had been on a few jobs like this, like I said at the start, and this one was the strangest so far. As soon as the lights were off in the room, I heard a weird noise. It was a kind of strange crying sound. It came from upstairs. The mansion was big, but there was only one floor above us, and that noise came from up there. I thought perhaps I was hearing things, but one of the others said out loud, "The fuck is that?" "It's just the house settling, maybe an animal on the roof or something," the foreman attempted to answer. "I don't think that's the house settling, there's no wind, it's hot. It seems a bit too hot out for cats to be running around too, you know what I mean? Maybe it's something bigger from the mountains, something else, you know," the old man said. "I don't like it. Sounded like a baby crying to me. It's creepy," I added. I remember that conversation so clearly. The sound stopped after about 5 minutes, and not long after that, I fell asleep. I awoke a few hours later to the frightened screams of one of my companions. The lights came on and I was temporarily blinded. I asked what was going on, scared. "Something just touched my face," the old man shouted. "It was small and soft. Was it one of you? It felt like flesh." The foreman quickly responded with irritation. "You guys left the door open, so any animal could have gotten in or something." "I can't see any animals," I said. "It wasn't an animal. Well, I don't know. Maybe. Well, I don't think so," the old man replied. We looked around the room and saw nothing. The silence wasn't comfortable. I was reminded of the strange crying sound we had heard on the floor above us earlier. If an animal came in, it must have quickly got out. Or maybe the old man just had a nightmare. I checked my watch, and it was 4 a.m. There would be time to think about theories in the morning, so I said, "Look, it's almost dawn now, it's not that hot, let's just shut all the doors and just get some shut-eye." No one objected. So once the doors were shut, I went back to sleep. When I woke up again, it was 8 a.m. The other two were up, and they were looking out at the pond from the porch outside. The water in the pond was about a third full, and there was another old man approaching the pond from the van carrying a wooden box. In the box was a golden statue. He pointed at the bottom of the pond, and the two old men I was with nodded. I didn't know what the hell was going on, so I went outside to take a look. I wondered what we would need a statue for. I looked at the bottom of the pond and it looked different. There were 3 of these statues in the bottom of the pond, evenly spaced out. They looked about 15 centimeters in size. The retired handyman said to me, "Look at that." He pointed down there. I saw footprints at the bottom of the pond, what appeared to be fresh footprints in the mud. The footprints were small, but human, like those of a child or a baby. We had our breakfast. I was really looking forward to getting the hell out of there. I asked what we would be doing that day, thinking that we would be finishing the pond, but I was surprised to hear that we would be working in the mansion. Well, at least it wouldn't be as hot. That crying sound wouldn't leave my mind, though. I thought that we would be cleaning the whole place from top to bottom, but we found out that there were rooms that we were forbidden from entering. This is where things get weirder and weirder for me. I was handed a dust cloth and a bucket and told that when the dust cloth was unusable, throw it away. And I was only to use water from the pond to clean the house with. I did as I was told. I wanted to be able to leave and get my money. Something was very strange here, and I told myself that if I complied, I wouldn't have to spend another night here. The dust in the rooms was so thick that it didn't take long before the cloth was black with dust, which in turn turned the dirty pond water a shade of black which light couldn't pass through. Again, we stopped for lunch, and then I deemed the cloth unusable by about 3 p.m. In that moment, the work halted. We all piled back into the minivans and hit the road. We all got back home at around 6 p.m. and the foreman turned to us outside the van and said, "You know what? You did some great work up there. Really good stuff, so there's a little extra in there for you." I was really pleased with that. I opened up the envelope he handed me, and I was shocked by the amount. It was more than I would have guessed. It was about $420 US. It was quite exhausting work, but for a student a few years back, yeah, that money went a long way. We all decided to finish off the evening with a meal in a moderately priced family restaurant. Since I had just been paid, I decided to get a steak. It had been a long time. We talked about all kinds of things, and eventually we landed on the subject of the crying thing we heard that night. The old man quietly said, "Call me crazy, but I swear, it was a baby we heard, and a baby touched me that night." "What makes you say that?" I asked. "Well, I know it wasn't an animal." "Why couldn't it be an animal?" the foreman asked. "Because animals usually have hair. The skin of that thing that touched me was smooth, and it smelled like milk and soap." We were silent for a while. "It was weird washing that pond out too. Why were there so many animal bones in it? And, I looked at some of those bones and I had to ask myself, could they not belong to humans? I really wondered. What's with the statues in the bottom of the pond too? It's just all so weird," the old man said. We sat there for a while, conjuring up theories, but we couldn't put a decent thread together and land on anything definite. I know it has something to do with a baby, though. I don't know if this is related, but I want to share it. After I graduated, I went to the USA. I was working illegally on a tourist visa for a while because I couldn't find much work. I couldn't get a woman over there. It was rough, I have to say. But I did meet a girl after a long time of waiting, and I had no intentions of getting married, and I'm sure that the feeling was mutual. Even though she was on birth control, we ended up getting pregnant. But sadly, we lost the child. We broke up a few months later, and I headed back to Japan. I got a job. I enjoyed some moderate success, and I lived a steady life. I met another woman, and we did get married. I got her pregnant twice, in fact, but we lost both. I've seen many specialists. There doesn't seem to be a good reason why it's happening. Sometimes I think back to that job in the abandoned village, and I wonder if it's related. I wonder how the foreman and the old handyman's doing too. I wonder how much that job has really cost me. The doorbell rang whilst I was on the phone with my mum. She was calling from her house, and I was in my apartment. "Yeah, okay, I'll call you back in just a sec. I just gotta see who's at the door here." I said. I used the intercom to say hello and greet whoever was out there. I didn't get a response. The doorbell just rang again. What the hell? That's weird. And then I remembered there had been some reports of troublesome incidents. There was a poster in the lobby saying, "Beware of visitors who don't call in advance." I thought that this was a bit over the top, but now I understood the warning. It's a bit of a frightening situation, especially if you're home alone like me. But there was every chance that this was a delivery person or something. So I responded again via the intercom. "Yes, hello, who is it?" Again, there was no response or reply, just eerie silence. Then the doorbell rang again and again and again. What the hell was this? Some neighborhood kids messing with me? Is my doorbell busted or something? I wondered. I had a bad feeling about what I was about to do next, but I went ahead and did it. I opened the door with the chain on and checked outside. I was peering around the corner to see if anyone was back there. Just when I thought no one was there, a man jumped out and in front of the door. He had short hair, a crew cut. He looked a bit odd. He had a narrow forehead, riddled with wrinkles. A slack-jawed expression was on his face. At a guess, I'd say he was about 40. He was dressed like a schoolboy. He wore a white, short-sleeved t-shirt and blue shorts. You came home? Yeah, just as I thought. Good. Right, yeah. You live in there alone, don't you? Yes, you do. How is that? This was really freaky. I hate these old-style apartments with no security. It's actually quite frightening. You never know who could be at your door. Not deterred with this guy and his weird behavior, I asked, "What is it that you want?" "Oh, yeah. I have the newspaper for you here," he said. I had never seen this newspaper before. What the hell was he, a late-night delivery newspaper boy? The newspaper looked made up, like something he made at home himself. "Sorry, I don't need that. I gotta go," I said. Well, wait. I have a great detergent you're gonna love. Come out here and look at this." "No thanks," I replied. I went to close the door on him, and he wedged his foot in the door and shoved his body against it. He created a gap of about 10 centimeters. This was literally my worst fear, some guy breaking and entering when I'm home alone. Who knows what this man wanted? I then imagined the worst thing possible, and without intending to, I let out the loudest scream. "I don't need anything, leave me alone, go away!" I screamed, as well as pleas for help. I heard another door in the lobby open. A neighbor, I thought. They must have heard my screams. They're coming to the rescue. "She said she doesn't want whatever you're selling. I suggest you get the hell away before I call the cops. I hate you salesmen. Always pushing for the hard sell, harassing this young woman who lives alone. It's disgusting. She was on the phone as well. You ruined that for her too." I saw through the gap. I saw the weird salesman staring angrily at my neighbor. He just laughed and muttered some curse words. He was so gross. There was a bit of a scuffle, and then he stopped pushing against my door, and I heard him run for it, down the fire escape. I wanted to give my thanks to the neighbor. I was so grateful to him for saving me, but his door was already shut. That was the first time I had ever met my neighbor, and I was really happy he came to help. There was something terribly off-putting, though. The fact that he knew that I lived alone, and that I was a single woman, and that I was on the phone when the weird guy tried to break in. I didn't even see my neighbor's face. I have no idea what he looks like, but to me, he is just as suspicious as the salesman. I need to move apartments. I recently moved into an apartment in a newly built building. My apartment is on the ground floor, and it's in the corner. I love it. It's in a really convenient location. and the windows let in a lot of natural light. I had no complaints. A couple of friends helped me move in, and we had some celebratory drinks to mark the occasion. We stayed up all night, and I got a little drunk. It was great. My friends left at around noon the following day, and I took a shower. My friends smoke, so I was worried about the smell on my hair. I'm really proud of my hair. It's straight and black, and I've never had it permed or colored. I try to keep it in the best condition I can. So after I shampooed, added treatment, and rinsed, I left the bathroom feeling refreshed. I started cleaning up the mess from last night. There were snacks, empty cans, and bottles everywhere. It was when I was vacuuming that I noticed something. There were long strands of hair all over the floor. They looked as long as mine, but the color and thickness wasn't quite the same. This is where things get a little bit weird. Both of my friends, who are also females like me, have short hair, and I have long hair. The hair on my floor pretty much was the same length as mine, so it couldn't have come from either of my friends. I just moved in and the place was spotless, so I had no clue how it got there. Although I was skeptical, I figured it must be my hair. Later that day, a friend who wasn't free to help me with the move came over to see the new place. She couldn't find the street, so I agreed to meet her at the station. Now, this friend of mine is really into the paranormal and the occult, so for fun, I asked her about the hair on my floor. She didn't seem that interested, so the conversation quickly changed. When we got to my place, I saw hair on the floor again. I thought that I must have forgotten to pick it up and put it in the bin, so I did, and I didn't pay much mind. My friend was visiting from another prefecture, so she was going to be staying with me. She had just come off a long train ride, so she asked to use the shower. I heard the sound of running water from the shower. After a few moments, I heard the water turn off, and then my friend came running out of the bathroom. In the bathroom, was all she could stammer. Her face was pale. I gave her a minute to get some clothes and to calm down a little, and then I asked about what happened. She said that she saw a woman with long hair in the bathroom. I was shocked by this. It was a newly built apartment. It wasn't like some haunted gothic manor. I explained that it was a new place and it's not haunted. I was hoping at this point she would say, "Gotcha," or something, but she didn't. She was adamant of what she saw. She was so shaken up by what she saw, she refused to stay with me that night. I was completely shocked by this because I was really looking forward to hanging out with her. She quickly gathered up her things, and as she was walking out, she told me that she would be in a nearby 24-hour family restaurant until she figured out what to do next. She shouted at me to call her if anything happened, and she begged me to go with her. I really didn't have time for her spooky stories, so I dug my heels in, and I said that I wouldn't leave. I can be quite stubborn. She left, and I was so annoyed. I stood there with her words still swirling around my head. I wanted to prove her wrong, so I decided that I was going to have a shower, like she did, and then go find her and convince her that she was wrong. Again, I'm stubborn. While I was in the shower, I was thinking, just because you like the occult and look for the paranormal in every place you go doesn't give you the right to ruin someone's move-in. I was really happy with my new place. I was cursing out loud and thinking about what I was going to say to her when I saw her. I was shampooing my hair, and I felt something strange. My head felt weird. It felt like fingers were scratching my scalp, and I was thinking, I'm only using the fingertips to massage my scalp. Why is this hurting? I stopped washing my hair for a second. I brought my hands forward, and I still felt the sensation of hands scratching and massaging my scalp. I was horrified. I realized that these hands weren't my own, and then I heard a voice. It was very faint, but I could hear it close to my ear. Beautiful hair. The voice was definitely female. I spun around to look behind me, and I caught a glimpse of a woman who appeared to have a burned face. The rest is missing time to me. I wasn't asleep, but I wasn't conscious. I literally found myself sitting on the floor of the shower with the water blasting on my head. I quickly rinsed off, and I got the hell out of the bathroom. I threw on some clothes and ran out of the apartment. I called my friend and found out where she was hanging out, and I raced over to her. We spoke and said that we would both go and see the real estate agent the next day to find out if they just sold me a home with a history. This is what I heard about my new place from the real estate agent. Before the apartment block was built, there was a florist in its place. The florist's daughter was a beautiful young woman with long, dark hair. She was like me, incredibly proud of her hair. One day the gas boiler in the bathroom exploded while she was using the bathroom, and her hair and her face was burned. Her longtime partner broke up with her because of her new appearance. She became socially withdrawn. She became hikikomori. She couldn't stand the sight of her own face and devoted as much time as she could to maintaining what was left of her damaged hair. She shampooed, treated it, and rinsed it several times a day. She often stood in front of the mirror asking out loud, "Is my hair beautiful?" while she brushed it. She would often ask her mother the same question. However, due to over-maintaining and the emotional toll of being in a serious accident, her hair began to fall out. That was the final straw for the traumatized young woman. She ended up taking her life in the bathroom. "She looked just like you. A young lady with beautiful hair," the real estate agent said, and smiled at me as if he was reminded of something nostalgic. I managed to get out of my contract, and I secured a move out. Before I left the spirit of that woman with the beautiful long hair, some flowers, in the bathroom. I hope she'll be at peace before too long. This is a story from my student days. I think it was about August time. We were staying on a small island. It was a school trip. It was on this remote island where we would dare each other. We were about 100 meters above the sea level on a small mountain. This island was partially destroyed in the war. You could see scars of the past all around. We were searching around on the mountain for war relics. One of my friends found a helmet in the bush. The island was full of debris. Earlier that day we were told that there were air raid shelters on the island. We wanted to find one and see who would be brave enough to go in. We waited until it was dark. It was perfect. We climbed up close to the summit and found what we were looking for. There was a huge air raid shelter. There was a clear path leading down the mountain. We approached the air raid shelter and felt cold air spilling out of it. It was the perfect setting. Everyone would start off with a candle at the bottom, and then they would make it to the top, wait for the others, and then we would all enter the air raid shelter together. A bunch of us were told by some of the seniors to go and hide in the bushes in different areas alongside the route up to the air raid shelter. And whenever we saw a light coming up the mountain, we were to make scary noises and shake the trees to scare who had taken on the dare of entering the abandoned air raid shelter. We went in groups so that we wouldn't know where people would be hiding. I saw the last group go by, and when that happened, we were all supposed to head back to the air raid shelter. I must have made a mistake because when I got to the air raid shelter, there was no one in sight. I didn't have a candle or a flashlight, I just stood there in the dark on a mountain. I felt as if I had been left behind. I didn't know how to get back down because it was so dark. I was at a complete loss, but then I heard what I thought to be the sounds of people coming from inside the air raid shelter. No voices, it just sounded like someone was walking around in there. And then I noticed something. I couldn't see any light coming from in there. Even though my eyes had gotten used to the dark, I couldn't see a thing. So that meant that there was someone in there, walking around, with no flashlight or candle. There was nothing but rubble in there. How would anyone know where they were heading? I thought about this as the footsteps sounded as if they were heading my way. My body decided before my brain to hide. It noped me right out of there. Fight or flight, you know. I hopped behind a nearby bush and ducked for cover. When I heard the footsteps approaching, I made a break for it down the mountain. I tripped and rolled about halfway down. I was covered in scratches and bruises. A flashlight shone into my eyes and I panicked. Luckily, it was one of my friends. They were all looking for me. I asked if any of them had been looking for me in the air raid shelter, and he said no. He said they all pretty much quit the dare after hearing the same footsteps I had heard. Who can blame them? To be honest, we were really lucky that none of us got hurt. I could have broken my neck falling down that mountain, or got impaled on something. not to mention whatever or whoever was in that air raid shelter and whatever their intentions were. Anyway, since I didn't technically do the dare, I was tasked with cleaning the place up. We had set up a load of lit candles near the entrance of the air raid shelter, and we were supposed to pick one up and enter with them. I had to go and get all these candles, as we didn't want anyone to know that we were messing around up there. I really didn't want to, but I went back up the mountain, half expecting my friends to start shaking trees and making creepy sounds to put me off. But thankfully they didn't. I guessed that they weren't still here. I reached the air raid shelter and felt that cold air once again emanating from it. I wanted to grab the candles and go, before I heard any more footsteps. I searched around for them, but I couldn't find them anywhere. I'm guessing some park ranger or someone picked them up, but I think it was the owner of those footsteps who found them. We didn't dare each other many more times after that night. I think we were closer to danger than we thought. There's a creepy urban legend about a locker at the train station in my town. There are these coin-operated lockers at the station, and if you write a letter and slip it into locker 99, then the dead will reply. Well, that's how the legend goes. It's not the most famous urban legend about coin-operated lockers, as there are some famous stories about babies being left in them. But this legend is really weird. For instance, where did it begin? Who started it? I don't know if we can ever be sure. One day after school, I asked my friends to come with me to see if the urban legend had any truth to it. I was interested in seeing what might happen. I was naive. The town I live in is a commuter town, so the station is pretty big. There are a lot of coin lockers in different areas of the station. We went in search of locker 99, and we found it. It was in a dark and lonely corner of the station, out of the way of the traffic of commuters. I had prepared a letter to put in there. I guessed that I could ask the dead anything, right? I mean, they had nothing but time to reply. Well, that's how I said it to my friends. In the letter, I had asked them if they could tell me what kind of girl one of the older guys at school likes. I had a crush on him. I wonder what kind of reply I'll get, I said aloud to my friends. And one of them raised a very good question. How'd you get a reply? So I opened locker 99, paid for an hour, and put my letter in there. I suggested that we all kill some time in a nearby cafe and return in an hour. When we came back, I opened the locker, and the letter was sealed, and in the exact same place I left it. I didn't feel like putting more money in the locker, and it didn't seem like I was going to get a reply. Those things are expensive, plus my friends didn't really want to hang around waiting for something to happen, so I decided to cut my losses and take my letter home with me. I thought that it was just a hoax. However, a few days later, a friend of mine came bursting into the classroom brandishing a letter. She was exclaiming that she had gotten a response to her letter that she had left in locker 99. All the students in the class began to gather around her. There was a twist though. The reply to her letter came to her home address. There was no sender information and the envelope wasn't stamped. It must have been hand-delivered. The students eagerly asked her what the letter said. She said that she hadn't read it yet because she wanted to read it with all her friends at school. How are you so sure that it's a response from locker 99 then? Anyone could have written that, I said. I was quickly scolded by her friends who told me that it couldn't be anyone else because the timing was too perfect. So the girl in front of the whole class tore the envelope open and everyone waited with bated breath for her to reveal the contents. I was still skeptical, but I will say that the atmosphere in that classroom was very tense. She pulled out a white piece of folded paper from the envelope and opened it up. The writing looked all shaky, like the letter had been written in anger or in a hurry, perhaps. It looked like it was written in pencil or perhaps charcoal. I couldn't make out any letters or words, it just looked like complete nonsense. Lines swirled and joined in crooked angles. It looked like earthworms. No one could figure out what it meant, but it was really eerie. I think that everyone in the classroom that day had the same feeling about that letter. Something about its aura made us all look at it in disgust. One of her friends said, "I don't think you should keep that." And no one in the classroom disagreed with that suggestion. The conversation about that letter finished when the girl stated that she intended to burn the letter at lunch with a lighter. Then several days later, the girl who received that letter was absent from school. The last place that anyone saw her was at the train station. Some kids at school say that she was seen in front of locker 99. No one knew of her whereabouts. A month passed and no one had seen her. No one spoke about that locker anymore. We were all scared. I don't know what happened to her, but I bet whoever posted that letter had something to do with it. And something to do with that locker. One day, a few months after her disappearance, I was walking to the platform at the station when I spotted something from the corner of my eye. There was someone stood in front of locker 99. I could only see them from behind, but they resembled the missing girl so much I felt as if I had to run over there and see for myself. I raced through the crowd of commuters, convinced that I had found my classmate, but when I got through the crowd, I couldn't see her. She was gone. However, the locker was open. Not by much, but enough for it to be noticeable. It looked like the mouth of some predator waiting to lunge at its prey. I edged closer to it. My brain was warning me to get away from the locker, but contrary to my will, I watched as my hand rose towards the door and opened it wider. There was a piece of paper in there. A reply from the dead. I wondered, what if it's a message from the girl who disappeared? I stretched my trembling hand to the folded piece of white paper. "Don't," a voice behind me said. I suddenly felt as if I had control over myself again, and I withdrew my hand from locker 99. I turned to look behind me, but no one was there. From the darkness of the locker, I felt as if something was staring at me. I sensed that there was something very malevolent at the heart of all of this, and it was there with me, and for an instant, it almost had me. I slammed the locker shut, locked it, and grabbed the key. I threw the key in the garbage. I had a horrible feeling that we should have done this a long time ago. I wonder sometimes whose voice I heard behind me that day. Perhaps it belonged to that missing girl. I wonder what might have happened to me if she didn't call out to me. I don't like to think about it. These days, I haven't heard many rumors about coin lockers, and I've finally stopped having nightmares. However, the other day, I was running for the express train, and I saw a bunch of high school girls gathered around locker 99 chatting. It seems like the urban legend is still alive. I'm not sure if I can still call it an urban legend. I expected to see locker 99 shut, since I threw the key in the garbage, but I couldn't believe my eyes when I saw that it was open. This happened when I lived at my old place. I was relaxing in the living room on a quiet Sunday evening, dusk in fact. My doorbell rang. I had an intercom in the room, so I went over and pressed the button and said, "Yes?"
"Is this Mr. Yamaguchi's house?"
a voice replied. "No, sorry, it's not," I answered. I was half expecting a "sorry for disturbing you" or something like that. But nope, this person was lacking some manners. I began to walk back to the living room. On my way back, I heard the door chime again. Just like before, I answered, and a voice replied,
"Is this Mr. Yamaguchi's house?"
Clearly it was the same person as before. I could tell by the voice. It was a kind of gloomy, depressed female voice. "No, I said it wasn't. Who's this, by the way?" I said. They must have let go of the intercom button, just like they had done the last time, because no answer came back. I hated this rudeness. Outside the door next to the apartment number is my nameplate, so there was no excuse to confuse me with this Yamaguchi guy, whoever that was. It was completely obvious that he didn't live here. I want to stay anon here, so all I can say is my name sounds nothing like that. The doorbell rang again. I was really annoyed now. I decided to go to the door this time, to look through the peephole. I wanted to see who was messing with me. There was no one out there. Weird. I opened the door, but left the chain on to try and get a better angle of the hallway, and still, I couldn't see anyone out there. I wondered if it was a ding-dong ditch at this point. I closed the door and went to go back to the living room, and just as I turned my back, I heard the doorbell ring again. I started to get freaked out now. I quickly looked through the peephole, but again, no one was there. I thought that this had gone on long enough. I took the chain off the door and opened it to see if I could find out who was doing this. I looked everywhere, but there was no one out there in that hall. I checked all the possible blind spots and places to hide, but again I came up empty. The corridor was long. There really shouldn't be anywhere for people to hide out there anyway. I stood there puzzled for a moment, when suddenly I heard,
Why didn't you open the door?
The voice came from behind me, and it terrified me. It sounded so hateful, like it was coming from the pit of hell. The issue was, my back was facing my apartment. I was leaning out of the door, so whoever said that was in the apartment. This was impossible. How could someone have got past me without me knowing? I didn't have time to think about it. I just ran for it. I ran to a nearby convenience store. I went over what had just happened, and I realized I needed to call someone. With my hands still shaking, I dug my phone out of my pocket and called my real estate agent. Hi, yeah, I live in room 101. Yeah, I think there's someone in my room, someone dangerous maybe, I stammered.
Sir, don't you think the police would be better placed to attend to this issue?
The realtor rightly said.
No, not police, I don't think. This is where you're probably gonna laugh, but I don't think that was a human.
The realtor went silent for a moment and said,
Just a moment, sir. I'll transfer you to the manager.
And I spoke with the manager. They didn't know why I had been transferred, but they were nice about the situation. I guess I must have freaked out the person who answered the phone. We spoke for a while, and the manager said that I wasn't the first person who had lived in that room who has reported an incident like that. The apartment's quite old, and the manager said that she hadn't had any complaints in the last few years, which was why she didn't mention this to me before moving in. By the way, this Yamaguchi guy did actually live in the building. After a while, his rent fell into arrears. The realtors went to check on his well-being to find that everything he owned, and the man himself, had disappeared. No one knew where he went. It's true that he lived in the building, but he didn't rent my apartment. So from time to time, residents reported that they had heard someone going from door to door, asking for him. I stayed with a friend that night. I went back to my apartment the next day. I tried to continue living there, but when I was in bed at night, my mind would torment me with that horrible voice. I got to a point where I couldn't stand being alone in there. I felt cold, and a strong sense that something didn't want me there. I moved out within the month, and thankfully I have had no one come to my new place looking for Mr. Yamaguchi. In my hometown, it always snows. We have a lot of open fields and forests. It's really picturesque. When I was younger, back in my high school days, I was playing out in the snow, in a forest with a friend. The forest leads to a small mountain that we used for skiing practice and field trips at school. There are a lot of dead and fallen trees, and there's a gentle slope. We were burying one another in the snow. Have you ever been buried in the snow? You'll know that it's pretty damn hard to get out of the snow. It's a really dumb thing to do too, so please don't try. My friend had buried me up to my waist, and I couldn't get out of the snow by myself. Even with my friend's help, I couldn't get out. It was very worrying and stressful. So I needed some additional help. It was pretty scary and cold, but I knew all I had to do was remain calm. My friend lived close by, where we were playing, so he went to get a rope. About 10 minutes went by, and my friend still wasn't back. I knew it would take about 10 to 15 minutes for him to get to his house and then back to me. I had no choice to wait and think warm thoughts. I stared blankly into the snowy landscape. I noticed something. In the distance, about 10 meters away, something under the snow was bulging. I watched with interest. I saw something begin to emerge from the snow. Some kind of black mass broke free from the snow. A jet black, thin limb jutted forth, and then searched for stable ground. It was about 1 meter long. Another limb came forth, and then the rest of the black mass hoisted itself out of the snow. I got a good look at the thing. It was covered in thick hair. It shifted around restlessly, and then I felt as if it looked my way. It was human-like in a way. It wasn't very big, no bigger than about 3 foot or so, and it moved on all fours. Its forelimbs were long and thin, and its back legs were shorter. I couldn't see its face because of all the hair that covered it. I have never seen anything like that in nature before, or since, and when I first laid eyes on it, after it broke out of the snow, shivers ran up my spine, not just because I was buried in the snow. When it noticed me, it appeared to move towards me. It wasn't quick, though. I think it could have had an injury, and if it did, then that really worked out for me. But even though it was hurt, it was moving my way, and it was horrifying. I wanted to scream or shout, but I couldn't. I couldn't move anything below my waist either. In my own childlike innocence, I believed that the only way I could defend myself would be to throw snowballs at it. I knew that wouldn't do much though, but that's all I had. The creature had closed the gap between us to about 4 or 5 meters. I needed to do something. I didn't know what though. I heard myself shout, "Hey!" really loudly. I heard my friend shout back from a little further away. I looked in the direction his voice came from, and when I looked back, the creature was gone. I guessed that it could have buried itself in the snow again. My friend came back with his older brother, and before I knew it, I was hoisted out of the snow. Once out, and while regaining the use of my legs, I told my friend and his brother about what I saw. They didn't believe me, but I persisted. I went in search of the entry point that thing came from, and I discovered something. Something to back up my claims. There was a mass of black, spindly hairs lying there in the snow. My friend picked up a few strands of the hair. I could tell he believed me when he saw that. After that, we never went back to that mountain again. Nobody we asked had ever seen anything like that creature that I had. This happened when I was in my second year of university. I was in a club and we would often meet up for extracurricular activities. We did this with other universities in the area so that like-minded people would get a chance to hang out. This took place on a night our club went to stay in the mountains. We were set to go on a hike in the woods. There we would have a barbecue, hang out by a huge pond, and then just unwind with some drinks and have a good time. Seeing the photos online and hearing some of the other seniors talk about it really made me excited to go. I was, in a sense, in charge of some of the organization. I had to take attendance, help people with their rooms, etc. Since the main purpose of our visit was to meet others and strengthen relationships between our universities, the first activity was a group walk. There wasn't as many people as you might think. I'm struggling to remember, but I guess there was about 30. After everyone got to know one another, we would all have roles in preparing dinner. Some of us would be in charge of cutting up the ingredients, others would be in charge of cooking, and another group would serve the food. It was awesome. It was like an adult summer camp. The air was thick with nostalgia, well at least it was for me. It was curry, and it was really good. I felt like the sense of community enhanced the flavor. About 10 people hit the hay after dinner, leaving about half of us left, awake, 15 at most. I don't know when this happened, but The conversation had changed, I guess because the sun went down. People started speaking about their own scary experiences. I didn't have much to offer myself, so I just kept quiet. I was listening though. Some of the guys started with their macho bravado kind of stuff. Dares became the subject of conversation. I guess us girls got swept up in it too, because before long we were dividing off into 4 teams to walk about 10 minutes off of our campsite to a nearby shrine. The plan was the dared group would walk by themselves to the shrine, go around it, and then return to camp. The walk looked scary. It was through a dark forest. Our only light would come from the moon. I remember the moonlight not being particularly strong and having to pass through trees and clouds to illuminate the way. In short, it was very dark out there in the woods. The walk shouldn't have taken longer than 10 minutes, but 10 minutes in the dark felt like the longest time. Finally, we approached a clearing. The moon was no longer imprisoned by the branches of the trees, and we could see the shrine ahead of us clearly. I looked towards the shrine and saw something. There was a woman stood outside the shrine, wearing nothing but a white dress. Her hair was so long. She was just stood there, staring at the shrine blankly. We gave up on going to the shrine. I mean, none of us wanted to anymore. When we got back to the campsite, I asked some of the others what they had seen, and they confirmed that they had seen the same woman. Well, some people in the groups disputed the fact that she was a woman. I thought that my eyes might have been playing tricks on me, but that theory went out of the window when others confirmed what I had seen. I don't recommend approaching shrines in the woods in the dead of night. This happened when I lived in Hachioji. I was in university at the time. I moved to Tokyo from Chiba. I lived in 3 different places when I moved to Tokyo. This experience takes place in the second apartment I moved into. I found an apartment I liked. The building was pretty old, but it had just been renovated. The structure and layout of the apartment was really unique, so as soon as I viewed it, I expressed my interest to the realtor, and then contracted it. I had a girlfriend, and she moved in with me. Let me just explain the layout of that apartment. It was on the 2nd floor of the building, and in the corner. It was strange and cool because I had my own personal staircase. It was connected to my apartment, through the parking lot. There was also a parking spot just below this private staircase, which made life easy. If you open the front door, you will see the toilet on your right, and the kitchen just down the hall behind it on the right. There are stairs on the left, and an entrance to the living room next to them. If you head up the stairs, you'll find a door leading to the attic. I really liked that attic. So like I said, the floor plan was pretty unusual, but cool. However, shortly after moving in, the weird goings-on began. My girlfriend loved the place as much as I did. One day we were sat in the lounge drinking booze, watching some TV. We then both heard the sound of the door handle. My girlfriend instantly went into panic mode. She was super freaked out. I tried to laugh it off, and I said something like, "Chill out, it's probably just the wind." I would be lying if I said that my heart wasn't beating as fast as it possibly could in my chest. I was just trying to stay calm and composed. It definitely sounded like the door. A couple of seconds later, the sound came again. This time, she really started to panic. She was close to tears. And what kind of man or boyfriend would I be if I didn't go and check it out? So I told her to wait there, and I went to see where the noise was coming from. I was breaking it. It was really stressful. I came out of the lounge and faced the front door, and I saw something. I saw what was causing the noise. Before my eyes, the front door handle moved up and down, like if there was someone outside trying to gain entrance. Panic had settled in for me now. The door handle rattled, and the door moved. It sounded like there was some real force behind it. I realized that the door wasn't locked, and as that thought came to me, the door flew open. I expected to see some masked, knife-wielding maniac, but there was no one out there. That particular fear slowly fizzled away, and I called out to my girlfriend. "Oh hey, don't worry, I think it was just some garbage blown by the wind outside making a noise." I lied to her in an attempt to reassure her. Despite no one being behind that door, I still felt scared. The things which are unseen are the most frightening. The things which defy logic and reason are the most frightening. I decided to try and forget about it and carry on. Stuff it down with Brown. I'm not that good at drinking though. Is that the right way to phrase it? I'm kind of weak. I get drunk easily and I always end up feeling sick. That day was really strange though. I didn't drink much, and I began to almost hyperventilate, like my breathing got really fast. I felt hazy and dull, as if I was looking through a yellow filter. Everything had this yellowish tinge to it. Something was definitely wrong. I felt as if I would either faint or die. No, I'm not being melodramatic. Things really escalated. So I sat there panicking, silently and internally, until I could bear it no longer. I turned to my girlfriend and asked, through labored breath, for her to call an ambulance. She called, and the ambulance arrived, and I was taken to the hospital. While in hospital, I was informed that I had suffered with hyperventilation, which they assumed was likely brought on by some sort of stressor. He said that my symptoms had already begun to subside. As you know, I was just at home sitting around drinking, so how the hell did I suddenly start to stress myself out? I didn't feel stressed out, and I wasn't hyperventilating anymore, so I just asked to leave. We called a taxi to take us home. Well, I was pretty concerned, as that hadn't ever happened to me before, so I called my mum, told her about everything, and asked for her opinion. I'll digress just for a second here and tell you about my mum. She has always believed that she has had the power to sense the presence of spirits. I mean, I don't think I have such ability. I'm half dumb. I didn't expect her to say what she said, but that sounds like the early symptoms of possession. You need to be really careful. That really creeped me out. The hyperventilation turned out to be a regular thing. I learned how to manage it a bit better with each bout, but I decided that I didn't want to live in that apartment anymore. Something was terribly wrong there. I tried to get out as soon as possible. My girlfriend was in agreement. She wanted to leave too. She could see that something was affecting me. I tried to stay out of that apartment as much as I could. As soon as my classes finished, I would try and find other things to do to keep me busy. I would go play the slots now and then. I wasn't ever interested in the slots before, and I don't play them anymore. It was a strange, short-lived hobby. After that, I would go pick up my girlfriend from her office job and then head home. About a month went by from the incident with the door. Then one evening, we came back to the apartment. Like I said before, there was a spot right by the stairs, which I always liked to park in. However, when we got back there was a bunch of people in the car park. I noticed that one of them was a monk, and all the others were wearing mourning attire. There were bouquets of flower, and lit incense sticks. It was a pretty strange sight to see. My girlfriend and I felt a little panicked. We parked away from them in a different spot, and I headed over to ask them what the hell was going on. The monk then smiled at me and said,
"Oh, don't worry. Things are going to be fine now. Please, don't worry."
I didn't understand. I asked him to explain exactly what he meant, and then a woman in her 50s stepped forward.
"I think I can explain. My husband ended things here. I'm sorry."
My mouth hung open. Apparently, he took his own life in our apartment only a few days before we moved in. I was stunned, but I asked, "Why are you doing this now then?" The monk then said that there was a shared belief that the woman's husband hadn't passed over, but now, with the help of the mourners here today and the ritual he had performed, he believed that the man's spirit was now at peace. I wasn't certain that I could trust if the spirit of that man was truly at peace. What I felt in those bouts of hyperventilation was incredibly profound levels of fear, the like of which I didn't want to experience again. So despite the reassurances of the monk, I complained to the landlord and moved out. I'm happy to say that the hyperventilation episodes have stopped, and my girlfriend and I live a much more comfortable life. This happened last summer. I woke one morning at around 4 or 5 a.m., and that's pretty rare for me. The sun was shining through my curtains. It was dawn. I decided to open the curtains and take in the morning. Like I said, it was pretty rare for me to be awake that early. When I looked at my sleepy town beneath the golden rays of the sun, I just thought, wow, seeing the sun rising that morning was truly amazing. I stepped out onto the balcony and I watched. It was the first time I had seen the sun rise from my new apartment. I had only moved in during the previous year's autumn. I was fascinated, but I quickly noticed something. It was coming from the northwest. We all know that the sun generally rises from the east, so it really puzzled me. I didn't understand what the hell was going on. I looked around, and then I noticed that I wasn't alone. I saw a family out there on the balcony across the way, in the opposite building. They were waving their hands. Not in a beckoning way, but more of in a wait kind of gesture, thrusting their hands palm forward with their wrists bent upwards. The father in the family appeared to be saying something. I couldn't hear him. I couldn't hear anything. It was as if all the sound had been removed. Life was on mute. I was trying to make out what he was saying via lip reading, but I couldn't. My head was spinning. The sun, the family, no noise. What was going on? I lost consciousness, I guess, because the next thing I knew, I was waking up in a hospital bed. I learned that 6 days had passed since the morning I woke up and went out on the balcony. The most shocking news of all came. I had a fractured skull. The back of my head had been so badly misshapen. When I first felt it, I recoiled in horror. It doesn't feel like the shape of a normal human head anymore. According to my neighbor, I was lying on the floor of the balcony with a pool of blood emanating from the back of my head. I found out much later that based on the bloodstains, I must have been banging the back of my head on the exterior wall, out there on the balcony. It sounded like the only thing that stopped me was when my head split. But no, that doesn't seem right at all. How does anyone hit their own head that hard against the wall? What kind of movement would I need to do? I thought that I slipped or tripped or something, but when I went home I saw the blood stains on the wall, and they were head height. In the end, I have no idea what happened, and although my injuries healed and I wasn't fatally wounded, I still suffer from severe headaches, insomnia, and the occasional numbness, which feels like paralysis. This happened a few years ago, and recently a vague memory from that morning came back to me. After I saw the family doing their strange wait waving motion, I noticed something else and looked away. There was another person on the balcony with me. I don't know where she came from, but there was a girl there. She looked to be around 16 years old. She slowly reached her hand towards my face and started slamming my head against the wall. 9 times my head hit the wall. I remember it clearly. I remember hearing the fracture. I remember hitting the floor and feeling the blood wet the back of my neck and my t-shirt. But my memory is strange. How the hell would a teenage girl get on my balcony at like 5 a.m? And she would need enough strength to overpower me and use enough force to fracture a skull. This memory seems just too impossible to be real. Also, the sun rising from the wrong direction, and that family doing the strange wait gesture, and when all the sound disappeared. That can't be true memories. I wonder if it was all a dream, and if I injured myself while I was sleeping somehow. Maybe due to the injuries I sustained, my brain created a weird memory in an attempt to help me rationalize the trauma. But there are bloodstains on the balcony. How did I get there? I have no idea what happened. No one knows what happened. I don't know. It's all really horrible. Did someone do this to me? Did someone do something to me and put me out there on the balcony? I have no idea. I went to visit my relatives on my mother's side of the family. They lived in the countryside, basically in the middle of nowhere. There was a girl called Saki. She was one of my friends, and we both were in the second year of elementary school at the time. I accidentally trapped Saki in an old refrigerator that had been dumped in a vacant plot of land, out in the woods. And this is my confession. When I was younger, I would always tease the girls that I liked. I guess that's just the way it is for some kids, huh? It was nothing more than a way to seek attention from girls I liked. We were just playing. It wasn't supposed to happen the way it did, but it did. There were so many things I could and should have done. We found a fridge, and she says, "Do you think I can fit in here?" And I say, "Go ahead and try." And I shut the fridge door on her. I was going to open it right away. I only wanted to give her a little fright. But that's all it was. But the thing is, I couldn't open it. No matter how hard I pulled, I couldn't open it. I realized the significance of the situation when I heard her screaming and banging against the inside of the fridge door. She was screaming, "Open it! Open it!" I just ran. I want to say I ran to get help, but I think I just ran away from the horror of the situation. It was too much to bear. Of course, I ran home with the intention to get help from my parents. The issue is that when I got home, I knew I would be in trouble, and I was wrestling with the right way to tell my parents. I didn't know how much oxygen was in a fridge. I thought it was just like a box, or being shut in a closet or something. The minutes turned to hours, and I still couldn't find the right way to tell them what had happened. Then I was eating lunch, and I guess I fell asleep because I remember my parents waking me up from the nap, asking me about Saki. My dad was stood over me, looking very angry. "Where is she, boy?" he asked. I'll never forget it. My body was riddled with shudders. It was instantly cold. I instinctively replied, "I don't know." It was already dusk outside, and we had been playing before lunch. No way she's still in there, I thought. That night, a search team of locals was assembled, and they searched the woods and the area. They didn't find her. I was sure that if the search and rescue team couldn't find her, and they searched the area where the refrigerator was, then she must have gotten out. I was certain of it. I mean, it makes sense, right? I thought that she had got lost somewhere in the woods, or perhaps she was kidnapped, both of which aren't my fault, right? For years, I've been convinced that is what happened. The issue is, I think deep down, that's not true. That's why I'm here today, to tell you my story. I needed to get this off my chest because every time I see a closed door or a fridge, my mind replays the sound of Saki screaming